Ta-da!
Hello gamers, Matthew here from Grey Army Gaming in lovely Lund, Sweden. Today for this episode of A Few Simple Steps, we are going to look at the use of Dettol for stripping miniatures of paint and primer. Okay, in beginning this video, I would like to first of all show you some of the finished products from my previous session that I have done of stripping miniatures. Here's an example of a metal miniature that has been stripped that had a really heavy paint job on. As you can see, the Dettol stripping does a brilliant job of bringing these miniatures back to their original condition. In my experience, the metal works best. The plastic is not as good, but it is still fairly effective. This miniature was originally primed in white, and it was painted with a heavy coat of paint, and we were able to strip it down such that there's a little bit of white primer left, but pretty much back to its original gray condition. And finally, I would like to show you another miniature that was originally primed in black, and this just had a primer on it, and we were able to strip it down to a somewhat dark looking gray. And I actually like the effect you get out of here because you can see that there are recesses in there where the black primer is still there, so it gives it a nice effect actually. So this is the end of product that we were shooting for. Let's show you the things that you need before we get started, and then let's go into the stripping itself. The first item you're going to need is a bottle of Dettol, and this is, as you can see, is just the normal antiseptic Dettol. If you're in Sweden like me, you can buy this at the English shop. Otherwise, you can purchase this in England. I think American people, you can get it in America as well. This is a 500 milliliter bottle, which is quite a bit for doing the stripping. So this is the Dettol you will use. It is very safe for your miniatures. It will not harm your miniatures one bit. In addition to that, you're going to need various sizes of jars. I like to use glass jars, and we'll be using these two different sizes for the stripping today. And last but not least, I would recommend that you use gloves, rubber gloves. If you don't have rubber gloves, you can always use plastic bags to put over your hands. Because this stuff is so potent, it will affect your hands quite a bit, so you want to have some protection for your hands. And for today's few simple steps, we will be stripping two types of miniatures. The first one is this, we have a set of Empire Spearmen that have an okay paint job on them. These are plastic, and we will put that into one batch. The second batch will be a group of various black primed plastic miniatures. Here we have a dwarf, we have a few other Empire miniatures as well. So we'll be putting that in our second batch. Okay, for our first batch here, we're going to throw in our Empire archers, and I'm also going to throw in a few black primed of the Empire models so I can use them in future legendary battles. So let's fill this up with our miniatures. So there you see the miniatures, and it's helpful to shake them down a little bit so they get more compact and they get more compressed together, so that you need to use less Dettol to cover them all. So with them in there, let's add the Dettol, and we'll cap this off and let it sit. Just a little reminder here, I would recommend that you do open a window when you do this because it is pretty potent stuff. So let's take our Dettol and pour it on in here. Cap that off and add your lid here to make sure that it stays nice and tightly sealed. And as you can see now, we've got all the figurines in there, and the Dettol covers them nicely, so we have a nice cover of all the figurines. And we will then let this sit now for approximately 48 hours before we begin to try to brush it off. So I'll check back with you in about 48 hours. Okay, here we are now, ready to do some of the stripping for our miniatures. These have been in this mix of Dettol for approximately 2.5 days, so about 60 hours. And that's entirely okay if they're in there that long, because Dettol does not damage your miniatures, so it's fine to leave them in for a long time. It's hard to see in the camera, but you can see that the paint is already starting to sort of flake off of the miniatures, so the Dettol has really done a good job in taking that paint off. We'll see if it did as good of a job with the primer, but the paint is certainly coming off without me even beginning to scrub. And a few important comments here before we get started. First of all, you will want to open some windows and get some ventilation in here before you start scrubbing, because the Dettol is some extremely strong smelling stuff. It can hurt your eyes and your lungs if you don't have some good ventilation. Second of all, you want to have some hand protection. In this case, I'm just going to use regular old gloves. Like I said, if you don't have access to gloves, you can always use bags on your hands, but the gloves are a lot better because it lets you actually use your fingers in a very good way. So get some gloves on your hands for protection. Next to your miniatures here, next to your sink, you're going to want to have a container of soapy water. Now this is really important that you do not get water and soapy water on your miniatures while you have the Dettol on, because if you do that, there's a risk that the paint will just simply stick to your miniatures and you'll have to do the whole process all over again. So keep the soapy water here on the side and keep it until you are ready to be finished with the miniatures. When you're done scrubbing, then you can put the miniatures in the soapy water and hopefully get some of that Dettol smell off of your miniatures. So we're ready to start scrubbing now. What you're going to need is a toothbrush, an old toothbrush that you can throw away when you're done with this process. Obviously you don't want to use it again for your mouth. And I like to have a small container that I put inside of the sink. I find it pretty effective to pour a little bit of Dettol into the container here and to use that Dettol to scrub the miniatures with, and it will keep the Dettol in here without having too much go down your sink. And the thing is, you can reuse the Dettol, so keep it in this container and you can pour it back in your glass jar when you are finished. Okay, let's open this up and see how we're doing here with our miniatures. Let's begin by pulling out one of our primed miniatures and take a look at that. So here are the prime miniatures. These miniatures were initially entirely black. Let me hold it up and you can see already that the Dettol has really done a good job of pulling off paint. This one looks like it even had a little bit of gray paint on it. So let's try to strip this one now. We will pour a little bit of Dettol into our mix here in the sink and grab our toothbrush and start scrubbing. Okay, there you go. It's maybe a little difficult to see here, but that miniature has been entirely stripped down now, back to its beautiful gray state. There is absolutely no paint left on it, so that was brilliantly done here with that Dettol. Let's throw that in our soapy mix. Finish off by cleaning off a little bit of the base here, which we can then, if not all the paint comes off, we can later on paint this black, or if you're actually repainting your miniatures, you can in fact add some color to that later. So let's finish off with this, and that looks pretty good, and let's toss that base into our mixture here as well with our soap. Okay, for the second miniature, I'd like to show you what it looks like when we take off some black primer. Here's some black primer on this dwarf. This minor, and you can see that a lot of gray is already sticking out, so the primer is already coming off. Let's do a little bit of scrubbing here.
And if we hold that one up, you can see that the black primer has entirely been removed from that miniature. It is in pristine condition as if it just came out of the box. I'm pretty satisfied with that. There's no more paint on this one, so I will take it and throw it into our soapy mix and let it soak to get off the remaining Dettol. And last but not least, I would like to show you once again our Empire archers. If you remember, these were entirely thoroughly coated with paint, and you can see here that the Dettol, without even scrubbing, has almost removed all of the paint from these spearmen. So Dettol's done most of the job for us. Let's scrub a little bit more and see if we can get the rest off. Okay, once again, maybe hard to see here, but the Empire Spearman has been entirely stripped down to its original gray plastic. No damage done to this figurine, back in original pristine condition. The Dettol has truly done a fantastic job on this round of miniatures. Depending on what kind of primer or paint is being used, it works better or worse. In this case, in this round, it has worked really well. So the black primer, the white primer, the paint have all come off brilliantly. So there you go. Let's continue scrubbing, and I'll show you how the final product looks when I have finished all of the miniatures. And one more thing here that's worth mentioning now that we are finished is, regardless of how colored and dark and disgusting this Dettol looks, the stuff that's remaining, go ahead and save it. Put a good cap on it, a good lid on it, because this stuff, even though it looks like it's not in good shape, it's not as clean as the stuff we started with, this can be used at least once or twice more, particularly with metal miniatures. So go ahead, cap it up, clean it up, put it in a place where you won't be bothered by the smell, and keep it for your next session of stripping. And there we go, we can lay them out after rinsing them off with some soap and let them dry. At this point you might want to look over your miniatures and see if there are any remaining little flakes of paint. Sometimes they get stuck in the recesses. You might want to then use a toothpick and go back and actually just try to pick it out a little bit. You can see that sometimes you can just pop it right out like that. And clean up those little recesses where maybe the toothbrush wasn't able to quite find its way in. So pick up a couple of these, look around, you can see maybe there's a little more paint on some of these, and just spend a couple minutes just picking out the paint that's stuck in the little nooks and crannies. But all in all, you can see that they turned out pretty good. And here is the final product of our paint stripping experiment with Dettol. As you can see, these dwarves look pretty good after they've been stripped. A little bit of touch up on the bases and a little touch up overall. But as you can tell, they have been restored nicely to their original gray shape, and they look pretty sharp. And here are a couple of the spearmen. If you remember the original spearmen with their heavy paint job, you can see they have been stripped down very nicely with a little bit of touch up on the bases as well. They look pretty sharp and pretty good, ready for gameplay. And last of all, here are a couple of the models that were primed with a really dark black primer. Even that was able to be stripped off, and you can see I left the flag, the standard there, with a bit of its dark black and gray shading on there for a nice effect. But even though stripped down very nicely, so that the Dettol was pretty effective even on the black primer.
And there you go, a simple and quick, easy way to strip plastic and metal miniatures of paint and primer. Thank you for joining us today here at Grey Army Gaming, where Grey can always play.